Good evening, Bishop Wright. Okay, so I said please mute. You're being recorded. Also, we will have a Q&A session for those of you who might be new. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a place that says chat. If you will enter your questions into the chat area, we will use those, and Carlton, who is our question facilitator, will ask your questions to Sally and the bishop a little later. So everybody good to go? Thumbs up, everybody's good. All right, let's go. And we will start off with an opening prayer with Carol Maddox.
Thank you. Let us pray. Almighty God, we give thanks to you for the gift of your church. Grant us ears of faith to hear your call, eyes of faith that all may see you among us, lives of faith that we may become your instruments of love and truth. We remember our rich heritage of the servants before us, faithful to the Great Commission. We confess that at times we fail to communicate Jesus' love in our lives, that we retreat into comfortable sanctuaries and do not seek to be a light to the nations, that we become preoccupied with church for its own sake and do not labor to share God's love. And at times we fail to recognize that the measure of success is not only in numbers, but in Christian maturity. Forgive us, Lord. Call us, Lord, to action. Send us into the world to be your messenger. Invite us to be partners in your mission, and make us loving agents of understanding and forgiveness to all to whom you send us, so that your glory and works may be revealed through all the world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. All right, so I get the privilege of introducing our speakers for this evening. So our speakers are as follows. The Right Reverend Robert Christopher Wright was elected June the 2nd, 2012, to become the 10th bishop in the Atlanta Diocese's 105-year history and the first African-American Episcopal bishop in Georgia. But that's not where the story begins. Bishop Wright was born in February 3rd, 1964 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I really hope he's not a Steelers fan. After graduating high school, he served 5 years as a U.S. Navy helicopter crew chief and search and rescue diver before entering Howard University in Washington, D.C. Upon graduating from Howard in 1991 with a degree in history and political science, he worked as a child advocate for 2 mayors and for the Children's Defense Fund. He later earned a certificate in biblical studies at Ridley Hall, Cambridge University in England, and a Master of Divinity from the Virginia Theological Seminary, Alexandria, Virginia, before being ordained in 1999. After about 4 years in New York City, he moved to Atlanta to serve at historic St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, Georgia, where he served 10 years, a period that saw dramatic growth, which is fitting for our discussion this evening. After he was ordained bishop, he was awarded honorary Doctor of Divinity degrees from the Virginia Theological Seminary and from the School of Theology at Sewanee, the University of the South. Also, during the past decade, Bishop Wright has served the Atlanta community as a member of Leadership Atlanta and served on the board of Holy Innocents Episcopal School. In the Diocese of Atlanta, in addition to serving as the Dean of the Mid-Atlanta Convocation, he has chaired the Commission on Ministry, the Deputation to the General Convention, and served as a youth dean at Camp Michael. He also serves as an adjunct professor at Virginia Theological Seminary. In 2015, he was named among the 100 most influential Georgians by Georgia Trend magazine. He's married to Dr. Beth Sarah Wright, an inspirational speaker and author, and mother to their 5 children, Jordan, Emmanuel, Selah, Noah, and Moses Daniel. And they were married on July 4th. How about that? Now, Sally Ulrey, as the missioner for Congregational Vitality on the bishop's staff, Sally collaborates with the Canon for Ministry to provide strategic planning, training, and program development for congregational vitality in parishes in the Diocese of Atlanta. Sally's formal training is in Christian education, concentrating in youth ministry, and she has 17 years of professional experience leading formation and youth ministry in parishes in the Diocese of Atlanta and has served as a trainer, consultant, and speaker for parishes and other dioceses. Sally also writes youth ministry curriculum and is the co-author, along with our former awesome youth director, Katie McCree, of the Dismantling Racism Youth Curriculum, which was created in collaboration with the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing. Sally is married with 2 elementary-age children and a terribly behaved puppy. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the awesome Sally Ulrey, and the only guy you know that used to jump out of a perfectly good helicopter as a habit, the Right Reverend Robert Christopher Wright, our Bishop of the Atlanta Diocese. Sally, you're up.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go over some facts and stats and then give it over to the bishop to talk about what some of those things mean. I think that you all have referenced the fact that Christianity in the United States is in decline across denominations. This little graphic is from the Pew Research Religious Landscape Study, and that was in 2014. And really it just is looking at how Protestants are in decline. Catholics are too, actually. This is also from that, and I'm going to give you the links to all of these things so that you can reference them later. I'm not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on these numbers, but I just want you to have them. It's basically looking at how, again, every denomination is in decline, and the net sort of decline there is about 5% over the past 7 years of this study. Since then, they have continued, not with the religious landscape studies that are sort of very focused on religions and denominations, but they've done several, polls and political polls where they also ask about, religion and how people affiliate. And they found that that continues to be true. And that one came out in 2019, that there is some decline. In the Episcopal Church specifically, over the past decade, there's been some decline, about 24.5%, and last year was about 2.5%. In our province, Province 4, which is in the Southeast, there has been, and even in the Diocese of Atlanta, over the last decade, there has been as well, less. And last year we were essentially flat, but still, this is something that is happening. This decline across Christendom. And so again, just in our diocese, among our parishes, we have 91 parishes in the Diocese of Atlanta and 117 worshiping communities. Over the past 5 years, you can see almost half of them were in some form of decline. A little over a quarter were growing, and then a little under a quarter were sort of holding steady, like not moving a lot. Last year, that picture has changed quite a bit, actually. And we have more parishes that are growing and many that have moved from declining into sort of a holding pattern. So still not quite where in the growing sector, but not declining quite as much. And we've had some positive movement in ASA, which is average Sunday attendance. So you can see that some parishes went from declining to holding, some from holding to growing, some from declining to growing, and some have just kept on growing for the past 5 years, and they're continuing to grow, which kind of begs the question, what are they doing? If this is a season of, not even maybe a season, but an era of decline, what are they doing that is helping them grow in this environment? So what we looked at is kind of what these parishes in our diocese, what are they doing? And just a note about, numbers. The goal is not numbers. Discipleship is the goal. Fulfilling the Great Commission is the goal. But numbers can be an indicator, and it helps us ask good questions. And also, we need to have an accounting of the flock so that we can know who's missing. In my former, jobs, I've been a youth minister, and numbers are really important. I better bring home the same amount of kids that I took, right? So numbers are important. They're not the end all be all, the goal, but they are important, and they can tell us things that are really helpful. And so one of the things we learned is that intentionality was a huge factor in whether a parish was growing. 100% of the parishes with the most growth were intentional about pursuing intervention strategies and trainings that were offered by the diocese, and 70% of those went after and put some time and energy and effort into fostering their own vitality. So intentionality was a big factor in their growth. Something else, another tool that we offer is called the CAT, the Congregational Assessment Tool. And that really looks at the internal experience of members in a church. What do they feel when they come to a church? And they found these 6 factors that characterize healthy congregations. Healthy congregations are not necessarily growing, but unhealthy congregations will not have sustained growth, because who wants to come to a place that is not healthy and is full of conflict or whatever? So one of the first steps to growing is kind of getting healthy. And, you know, you don't invite guests to your house if it's under construction. You kind of set everything in order and make it very welcoming and hospitable. So if we want to grow, one thing is getting healthy. And I just want to key in on one of those factors, which is flexibility. The CAT, the Congregational Assessment Tool, about 5,000 parishes across denominations across the United States have taken that assessment. And what we have found through that is that growing churches, the churches that were growing, scored in the 75th percentile or above for flexibility. And what that means is it's not, you know, Episcopalians can be flexible. They actually can. It's not that we are like throwing out our traditions and our liturgies, none of that. It means, can we adjust our service times so that other people can come, that we can reach a demographic we haven't been reaching? Can we revamp sort of all of our Christian ed offerings and how they're offered so that we can accommodate families or other groups of people that haven't been accommodated? And can we do that without, you know, a disturbing amount of conflict? And so flexibility, you know, they call it growing pains for a reason, because when we grow, sometimes that means we have to be uncomfortable. And so, you know, the next time somebody sits in your pew at St. David's, think about, you know, we got to be flexible. We got to stretch. If we really want to grow, we have to be accommodating. Or if they want to make some big change to accommodate a different group or to adapt, just think about that as that's your chance to stretch and increase your flexibility. So, because that is a key factor in growth. And then the other thing that, you know, it kind of begs the question, okay, all of that data is from 2019, but here we are in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic and a lot of unrest. So what about that? What is going to happen to the church? And so a church historian, Diana Butler Bass, did a lot of research into what happened to congregations during the Great Depression, because we have a lot in common. We're sort of in the financial pieces are there. There was a pandemic right before the Great Depression. So, you know, what was going on then, and is there anything we can glean from what was going on during the Great Depression? And what she found is just some really interesting parallels that I think will be helpful for us. Let me see my notes. The American church in the 1920s was also already experiencing decline, just like we are now, both in money and in membership. And what she found is that the Great Depression exacerbated what was already in place. So institutions that were already struggling, it just sped up sort of their decline and their demise in some cases. And while major institutions were failing, innovative religious groups took off, like the Pentecostal movement, churches that served disenfranchised communities. And the churches that grew, not just survived in that time, but actually thrived, were the ones that empowered lay people to do ministry. They were about the immediate inclusion of all members of society of every walk of life. And they really focused on practical outcomes related to the Great Depression, like healing ministries and food ministries. And those were the ones that ended up thriving, which I think there's probably something that we can learn from that today. But they also focused on marginalized communities. So that would be something that I think we need to think about is that the failing institutions, they may continue to fail in this time. But innovation and that flexibility, that innovation piece is gonna thrive. And we need to be paying attention to the communities on the margin. There's, I think, a temptation to sort of take care of ourselves and panic a little bit and like kind of take care of our own. But what we found, not just throughout history, but also in the congregational assessment tool, is that parishes that have an inward focus, they kind of go into chaplaincy mode and just sort of take care of themselves and continue to decline. But ones that have an outward focus and who really care about their communities and their neighbors, money follows mission, right? So if we really care about that, that was something that happened in the Great Depression as well. Both evangelical and sort of mainline churches came together around these social programs, and they sort of had all the political power that was needed to help FDR's like social programs and stuff like that. So it could be that this is something that could bring us together as well. But yeah, so all the history pieces, very interesting. The other thing that we found, growing parishes in our diocese were really intentional about evangelism. Can you imagine? And so the bishop actually asked us to study this summer, what were sort of the practices and attitudes around evangelism. And we didn't have every parish respond, but the great majority of our parishes did respond, and 44% of them had a formal evangelism committee. Those with a committee, 63% of them were growing, but if they did not have a committee, then only 80% of them were not growing. On the flip side of that, we looked at all of the churches that were actually growing in the diocese. And 67% of our growing churches did have a formal committee, whereas 88% of them who were not growing did not. So 80% of them with them had positive effects. Like some of them had stopped their decline, others of them were actually growing. But only 20% of parishes without that were growing. And what we found even in those parishes is that even if they didn't have a formal committee, they were still intentional in some way about evangelism. It just might not have been through a committee. So in summary, what we found about churches in our diocese that are sort of still thriving and growing in this time of decline is that they had a lot of intentionality. They're very intentionally pursued their own vitality and their own health. They had high degree of flexibility and were willing to adapt and try things and sort of normalize failure as learning. So they were able to do that. And they had a focus on evangelism. They were ready and prepared to tell their own stories, just like Paul says, be ready in season and out of season. And Peter says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. And so they were, had some intentionality around evangelism and sharing their story. And then the other thing is they weren't inwardly focused. They continued to maintain that outward focus and reach out to people in their community who needed it the most on the margins. So that's some things that we found. And I'm going to stop there and let the bishop take it from there.
I don't know if y'all know, but she just took y'all to church. I don't know if you know that that you have been properly taken to church with the archdeacon's prayer, with Sally's details and data. We have been taken to church, friends. Before I start to yammer on, I just want to make sure that there are no clarifying questions for Sally. I think she's really top notch, folks, and she's got some data and some experience to share with you. So please, if you got something for her, please, by all means, you know, either in the chat box or just raise a hand and we'll get to it. We're a small enough group to get to it.
There is a question for Sally, and it's from Bill. And the question is, what are the age and gender demographics in the declining segments?
I don't know. I'd have to study that.
There you go, Bill. That's
yeah. I actually, you know, most of this data that comes from our diocese is from parochial report data. And I don't know that they have to report that in the parochial report. So that would be something that we would have to kind of like ask churches to give us their data. So I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you, you know, there is some data out there about the Episcopal Church as a whole, just its membership that you can find. And I'll see if I can find that for you before we end, or at least maybe a follow-up email.
Yeah, the issue there is if, let's say, the decline was with the aging population, it would tell us one thing. If it's with our 20, 30, 40-year-olds, as we look at, because I know in general we're an aging population in the Episcopal Church, that would tell us something else. And in terms of actions we need to take to reach the appropriate people to tip that trend, it would be good to know where our failings are.
That is a great point. And something that we have noticed, and this is not specific to the Episcopal Church, this is sort of non-denominational across like all of the nation, is that, you know, youth are walking away, like they say, walking away from their faith and not coming back like they used to, like just after college or whatever. There is that trend. There's also something that's called the rise of the nuns, where there's like, they just have no religious affiliation. That's also something that's happening. But a study that just came out last month by Pew was talking about how youth today, Generation Z, really do attend church as much as their parents, but they're less likely to say that it's meaningful. So that has some things to say to us about how we help disciple them. And it also just, you know, another study, I'm putting these two together, just reading between the lines. This is not, I have no hard evidence. I'm just making sort of some inferences, but another study was talking about how parents, like, they really like the idea of discipling their own children. They just feel very ill-equipped to do that. And so I think that part of what might be going on is that parents aren't able to articulate or to express or to maybe even show their kids like the deep, meaningful thing that's behind prayer. Even though parents will say, they'll respond on these surveys that that's very meaningful to them, but their kids aren't sort of like catching on to that. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I've been to several webinars that talk about how to do faith formation in the family and how important that is. So I'm kind of like on that kind of line of thinking, but yeah, so yeah, there's some data out there about youth as well, that is part of where the decline is coming from, is that they are sort of still very spiritual, but don't feel affiliated with a particular denomination.
Other questions for Sally? Sally, that data I sent you from 815, if you can post some of those links, that might be useful for them.
Yes, I will.
We just got the most recent data from what we call the national church. We call the intergalactic church. We just got that that data in, and if Sally can give you those links, it'll give you the freshest piece that we can give you.
That's right.
Which is an overview over the 109 dioceses that make up what we call the Episcopal Church. All right, you ready to jump in? You ready for this? All right, let me acknowledge my colleagues. So I see Dean there, I see Michelle there, and I see Archdeacon Carol. Archdeacon Carol doesn't have her grandchild in her arms, and so we have taken her away from her grandchild, and so I'll be brief. It is lovely to be with you, and thank you, St. David's. I can't tell you, I would give away an hour or two every evening after dinner if this was the subject. If I could get with congregations who wanted to know about how can we go after the one as the 99, I'd spend every night for an hour or two on a weekday talking about that. So I can't praise you enough. Thank you for having a heart for that. I appreciate that. You've heard, I don't want to make her blush, but Sally knows what she's talking about. And so I would just commend her to you for follow-up conversations. She knows what she's talking about. And so I commend her to you. So Hal, thank you. Yes, so Hal's already said that I'm not terribly bright because I used to jump out of helicopters for a living. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt, okay? So let me start, and then what I want to do is to make sure we have time for questions, but I want to give you a bit of a ramble here. So here we go. So I want to situate you first in context. So the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta is one diocese among 109 dioceses that make up something called the Episcopal Church, okay? The Episcopal Church is actually not a church in America. It's an international church, okay? We've got churches in the Caribbean. We've got churches in Europe. We've got churches in South America, okay? We've got churches in Taiwan. A gold star for anybody who can tell me the largest diocese of the 109, the largest diocese of the 109. If you know the answer, raise your hand. No, Sally, put your hand down. I know you know. The largest diocese in the thing that we call the Episcopal Church is the Diocese of Haiti. The Diocese of Haiti, the Diocese of Haiti. And then there are a few New England dioceses that come in after that. Out of 109 dioceses, the Diocese of Atlanta is the eighth largest, So we're up there, we're in the front of the queue here. We're in the front of the queue. We keep a budget of about $495 million. And we have, as Sally has said, 117 worshiping communities, a good chunk of which I inherited. Some we planted. The fastest growing congregations that we have in the Diocese of Atlanta are all Hispanic congregations. We have now more Hispanic congregations in the Diocese of Texas. You know who told me that? The Bishop of Texas. Because I didn't know that. So I'm trying to give you, I want to just sort of walk you through so you can get a feel for things. And then we can take a dip in. I was taking some really good notes there. And I'm going to wait till we get to the chat just to hold on. So what else do I want to tell you? Today is my anniversary of consecration. Today. 9 years ago today, we began a journey together. Tomorrow, I start my 10th year. Look at my hair. Look at my hair. It was brown and beautiful when it started, Carol. Now look at me. Look what they've done to me. Anyway, so today we start our 10th year together, and I give God thanks. Truly, truly, I give God thanks. Even in COVID, I give God thanks for our walk together. Here's what I want to say. Sally has already given you the goods. There's a straight line between congregations who bring intention to growth and those who don't. That's the end of the presentation. Let's all go home now. That's it. Well, we're already home. Let's go have a cocktail. That's it. That's the bottom line. You got to hear me. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. That is the bottom line. So I'm asking St. David's to the vestry, how often do you look at your month-to-month guest data? Is the website, and I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. None of these questions are meant to guilt, shame, or obligate anybody. But, you get me after 7 o'clock, this is what you get, okay? So these are the sort of items you got to tick off if you want to be outward facing. Sally's already told you what the work is. If you want to be outward facing, you have to measure it. If you don't measure it, you don't care about it, okay? The care is just anecdotal and sentimental. If you don't measure it regularly, you don't care about it. Take it from me. You don't, right? Let me tell you, one of the hardest things to get going in a church is data. People just don't want to use it. You got to use it. Jesus used it. I'd love to preach a sermon series about that. Jesus used data all the time, right? Somehow we think like, oh, we're being corporate by using data. Foolishness, nonsense. You count what counts. That's just the bottom line. And you don't count so that you can feel good like good boys and girls. You count so you can be effective. That's all. You count because you can be effective, because the stakes of what we do are very high. We're trying to create a place for people to find a home so they can make a life with God and one another. That's important stuff. So you count that. You count it. You count it every vestry meeting. Everybody wants to fuss over the columns in the budget. Let me tell you, that's downstream of the work. You build the vestry meeting according to the priorities. What's first in your vestry meeting? After we say prayers, after that comes, who have we touched? Have we had any yield? Is the website outward facing, or is it full of jargon? People don't know what the hell that is. All the fancy words we use, they don't know what the hell that. They want to know what time is worship. That's what they want to know. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for the Eucharist, right? Every day and twice on Sunday, I'm all for it. But the folks that might need to be with you at St. David's, they don't know what the hell Eucharist is just yet. But they need a home, right? They need a home. So what's the vestry agenda look like? And then what's the annual report to the congregation look like? How many baptisms? How many confirmations? How many weddings? How many funerals? These are touches. These are when we got to care for one another. I tell you, I grew a parish in Southwest Atlanta, and it quadrupled. And you know, I grew it through weddings and funerals, because nobody can marry like us and nobody can bury like us. I'm just giving you the short, straight version. This is the after 7 p.m. version, right? Since we're family, I'm giving all this good stuff for free. I just charge the Diocese of Colorado a whole bunch of money to tell them the same stuff I'm telling y'all, right? So you got to preach your face off for weddings. You got to preach your face off for funerals. And then people say, I like the cut of that jib. I'm coming back. That's how you grow it. The friendliness piece, once they're there, is a big piece. And I remember Paul Winton of St. David's Past used to spend a lot of time on once they come. And that's good, but you have to hold intention once they come with how do they find you? If I went to your website right now, would I, as someone who has no relationship with church or God, feel welcome? I did a wedding in Las Vegas once. How cliche was that? And because it's my bad habit to get up in the morning and go to church on Sunday, I got up in the morning, early in the morning, and I went through the website of a couple of churches in Nevada. I'm not going to say any names. And the websites were so abysmal, I stayed in my room and said my prayers. I'm telling you the God's honest truth. I saw photographs of empty parking lots and empty classrooms and empty worship spaces. Why in the hell would I leave my bed and go there? I want to see God's people. I want to see some expression of fellowship. I want to see joy. I want to see people caring for one another. That's what'll get me in an Uber and get me to your campus. I'm just telling you straight now. But I don't know what it is about us with these edifice complex. We want to show you a big old empty building and think we've done something. Lots of empty buildings. I want to see you. I want to see St. David's at worship, caring for one another. I want to see faces and hands and smiles and fellowship, like the fellowship I have experienced at St. David's. So we got to bring real attention to the photography, outward facing. It's all proclamation, friends, all of it. All proclamation. You're telling a story. You're telling a story, right? And if you don't look good for taking the medicine of the gospel, why should they come and take your medicine, right? The medicine ought to look like it's benefiting you. Yeah? When I make presentations to young preachers, I tell them, why would I listen to you? You know, you're preaching about heaven, but you look like hell. Why would I come and listen to you? Right? Let me go down my list. I want to say when we get to evangelism, I have a double mind when it comes to evangelism. Here it is. So when we talk about an evangelism committee, I don't, of course, we need to have a group that is sort of tip of the spear on that subject, right? Who are really working on that. I got it, no problem. But ultimately, we want to work to a place where the entire congregation is the evangelism committee, right? We want to push that down into the culture of the church, right? So I want to ask you, because we have a bit of a disembodied, a bit of a bifurcation when it comes to this subject. So no shame, no obligation. Don't raise your hand. Just make some notes to yourself. Here's a couple questions for you. We want to talk about evangelism, right? But let me set the stage here. Where did you go to school to learn how to recommend a restaurant? Where did you go to school to recommend a podiatrist or a gynecologist or obstetrician? Where'd you go to school for that? What bishop came to you and taught you how to recommend a jeweler or a real estate agent? You see where I'm going with this? So I think what we do is we put evangelism in a gated community when we start using that word, right? And we start putting evangelism, the notion, in a cul-de-sac, and it's not useful. I want to know, when's the last time you recommended God is all I want to know. So that's question number one. Think about it now, friends. Think about it. This is with love, nothing but love. When's the last time you recommended God? I didn't say anything about the Episcopal Church yet. I'm coming to that. When's the last time you recommended God? If I went around right now and took a poll, I bet you nearly all of y'all tell me you've been in church your entire life. Isn't that about right? That's about right. So, which means, Tom says no, but what that means is, if you and I have been sitting somewhere for a couple of decades, we ought to be able to have a little bit of a personal and authentic recommendation. That's all people want. They don't want the pitch. They just want to know something about you. They don't have to have the answers. You definitely don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to be ordained. Y'all remember Jesus was not ordained, right? I mean, people forget that, right? So dumb people like me had to get ordained to follow a layperson, right? When's the last time you just recommended God softly, gently, authentically, respectfully? Just said, my nephew's birthday is today. I've seen my nephew go from a mighty long way and come to a place now where he's a husband and a father and a business owner. I said to him today, I'm so glad to see you. You've finally latched on to God's plan for yourself. Just when's the last time you recommended God? That's question number one. When's the last time you led prayer? When's the last time you led prayer? Maybe over COVID, you grabbed a hand in the household and led prayer. Maybe you cracked that Book of Common Prayer beyond the dirty stripe down the middle, and you looked over in the morning prayer or compline or noonday prayer. When's the last time you led prayer? See, Sally, what I'm trying to say is that I worry that we hold up this bar of evangelism, and our friends and our folks, they haven't done the basics yet. How could you do anything in the public square if you can't get to the place where you can say, friends, let's say a prayer. Now, you know who the best evangelists are, don't you? It's grandma. So some of the women on here, I'm talking with all due respect. I know you know what I'm talking about. Many of us wouldn't be here and in our right mind if it wasn't for grandma, and maybe not even our own grandma, was somebody else's grandmama, who gently, boldly, kindly, affectionately, authentically recommended God. When's the last time you led prayer? Let it. Just grabbed a hand and said, baby, let's pray. Can I give you one of my pet peeves? People always say, sometimes people will risk and say, would you pray for me? Right? And what do we say? We say yes, right? Don't say yes. Pray now. Say, let's pray now. Grab their hand. Well, I don't know if we grab hands anymore now. Put a hand on the shoulder, and pray now. We've got to increase our abilities here, right? Because evangelism flows through that kind of stuff. And it's funny, as you take these baby steps that I'm commending to you, it's funny how you can go the next piece, right? The next one is, I wonder when the last time you commended spiritual content. When's the last time you commended spiritual content? When's the last time you commended spiritual content? In other words, out of your own personal archive of good stuff that you use, right? I wonder when the last time you shared that with somebody, right? I meet people all the time. I don't have the answers for their conundrum. I just don't. But, you know, I was telling a young man the other day, a young priest making a decision. I said, you know, it sounds like where you're going through right now, you might need to talk to the book of James for a little while. Just dip your toe in the book of James, first chapter. Spend some time with him. See, if we don't have that sort of stuff, you know, we can't commend it. I know some of us are Southerners, and you know, what's that old Southern Alabama-ese? You know, y'all speak Alabama-ese? Any native Alabamians on the phone? You know, in Alabama, they say you can no more preach what you do not know than you can come back from where you ain't been. Hello, somebody. In other words, don't tell me, don't describe a vacation you never took to me. Beth and I are going to Asheville on the weekend. It's her birthday. And what did I do? I called somebody who knows Asheville. And I said, where do I take my wife for a fancy dinner? Now, I called this friend of mine because he lives in, wait for it, Asheville. Why do we overthink and over-spiritualize this stuff? You know, so what book has helped you? What spiritual leader has helped you? What content has helped you? Right? Good. All right. All right. You see the direction I'm going in, right? And then the last thing, I guess the last thing I want to say. So Tom, thank you so much for keeping time for me. Thank you, Tom. I guess what I want to say is this: what excites me right now, and it's in and Dean, it's in the questions that we gave you to do some run-up work to reopening your building in COVID. There's a series of questions. We weren't trying to frustrate you and just sort of torque you off. We wanted to give you questions because what we believe now is that COVID has accelerated for us an opportunity to get back to basics. That's what we believe. We believe that COVID, for all of its grief and all of its loss and all of its loss of livelihood and all of its loss of life, 215,000 people, Americans, as of today, that's not a political statement. That's a statement of life and death. 215,000 Americans have died, right? So that's on the liability side of the ledger, friends. On the sort of benefit side, on the possibility side of the ledger is this. We have been constrained and we have been protocoled to death now, right? And we have had to figure out how to be church across the airways. Bless the Lord and thank God for Zoom. I don't know who the CEO of Zoom is, but bless him or bless her. Bless them. But now we can never go back in the same way that we were configuring. There's a new world now. So here's the question, $64,000 question. Why does St. David's exist? I know that St. David's is historic. I know she's got lovely programs. She's got lovely people. She does good work. She raises good money, et cetera, et cetera. I know the other side, she's got debt. She's got to pay that off. She's in the transition. I know the whole flipping story. But I'm asking you another question. But why does she exist? See, if we're not careful, we'll over focus on what, where, who, when, and how much. And those are all important questions, to be clear. All important. But the rocket fuel for St. David's future is, why does she exist? When you get back down to why she exists, then you get rocket fuel, then you get jet fuel. And why she exists is that there are people in Roswell who need to know Jesus Christ. And they need a spiritual home where they can be welcomed and loved, where they can belong and believe and become. That's why St. David's exists. She is a spiritual outpost for Jesus Christ in Roswell. If she does not fulfill that, who needs her? Nobody. I'm telling you straight because I love you. Nobody needs another overpriced building to heat and cool. Nobody does. But if that place is a gathering place for people to come and meet one another, fellow travelers, and to hear the good news of Jesus Christ, which changes lives and changes marriages and changes directions, now that's worth something. I'm just telling you straight. So this whole notion about church growth is really about, can this group, St. David's and its vestry and all those people who are stakeholders, can we get through all the silliness and all the icing down to the cake? That's it. That's the whole shooting match there. And the cake is and has been for 2,000 years. There are people who are lost and they need a home. They don't need just to come and help us with our budget. They need a home. They need to know that there's a lot of bad religion. Are y'all looking around? There's a lot of bad religion out here. Just look at it as from a total market standpoint. There's a lot of bad God out here. One thing that we do well in the Episcopal Church is we say we got a table big enough for everybody. That's a good message, man. That's a really good message. So that's sort of my time. And bless you, Tom, for keeping control of a preacher who hadn't preached to people in a while. And so I'd love to hear from you. I wonder what I can fill in for me. I can tell you some programmatic stuff that we've done in the diocese or whatever. But I wanted to get that into the record. And so off we go. What do you want to do? Hal, I'll let you direct traffic.
Okay, let's do this. I know there's some hands raised, but just a quick reminder, if you could do us a favor and go into the chat and send your question to Carlton. He's labeled as Questions Carlton, apropos, and he will be the facilitator of asking the questions. So if you could do that, Carlton, you are up.
Well, there's nothing on the chat, so I'll recognize Marilyn to ask her question.
Oh,
Go
thank
ahead,
you.
Marilyn.
Because I was having trouble reading my screen. So thank you.
Go ahead.
I wanted to say, to your point about prayer, one of the things that I think as Episcopalians we have at our fingertips that is so rich and wonderful is the Book of Common Prayer, and my favorite part of it is the prayers at the back. But I found for a long period of time that same rich, much beloved section that I so appreciated was also intimidating, because I felt like I couldn't pray that well. I don't have those words. And I mentioned that to the woman at University of the South who is on staff there. She's ordained, I don't remember her name. She was our speaker for Women's Retreat 2 years ago up at St. Mary's. I mentioned that concern to her, and she said, you know, just say what's on your heart. And it really was room for thought, in that I realized the most powerful prayer, the most straight to my heart prayer I had ever heard in my life was when our daughter was about 1.5 years old, a little more than that. It was Easter. We were living in Lexington, Kentucky. And we were at the farm of a dear friend's house celebrating Easter dinner together. And we had an egg hunt planned. And I was all excited about that. New mom. Easter dresses, all the eggs, you know, all the frou-frou. And it was drizzling rain out there, and that wasn't going to cut it for the egg hunt. And I just remembered being just all forlorn about that as we gathered for dinner. And we gathered up in the parlor of this little old farmhouse and held hands. And old Red, Milton Stinnett, says, "Thank you, Lord, for this good rain." Put reality right in front of you. This is the farmer talking. Let's get down to basics. Nothing fluffy about this prayer. It was on his heart, and it was important. And I learned a lot from that. And I feel like sometimes we forget that everybody, you were talking about the jargon, everybody doesn't speak that language.
That's right.
The language of jargon, I'm not talking about English.
Yeah.
And one of my concerns at St. David's, for instance, is that when we are in service in the building, we very frequently sing the Lord's Prayer, and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But for somebody who just came in the door and that's the only prayer they know, they don't know the tune. We've just put a wall up between us and them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, that little things divide us from people, and we're learning a lot about that in 2020 in a lot of ways anyway. And it just merits a really good look at ourselves. A conversation, this is my last point here, a conversation that I was a part of within the last 2 or 3 years. Names will be left out of this. I remember somebody saying, with just a brushing away sort of attitude, well, people in condominiums don't go to church. And I'm like, you know, we are immersed in a neighborhood where condominiums are going up all around us. Maybe they don't go to church because nobody's invited them, or that we're not giving them what they're looking for when they get there, or that we're not even necessarily making them feel welcome, although feedback at St. David's has been very good on that people have been made to feel very welcome. Mm-hmm. But then we need to put our arms around them. Mm-hmm. Things to think about. The end.
Thank you, Marilyn. 2 things I want to say, and then we get some other questions. Annie Lamont has helped us, right? She said there's basically only 3 genres of prayer, right? Which is wow, which is adoration. What a wonderful God you are. You know, down at the shore, when you're holding your grandchild, in nature, wow. The other one is help, or my prayer to God often is, hey, man, now would be a good time for you to show up. That's a prayer for help, right? And the other one is, what is it? Wow, help, and what's the third one, Dean?
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I think we don't have to decorate it really more than that. I think, though, that as students of the Book of Common Prayer, I think that even with those at the base, if we could sort of strengthen up our base on those 3, I think the Book of Common Prayer helps us, for instance, in the midst of political strife, in the midst of political division. The prayer book has something to say, which is not partisan. And so we can lean on that when we don't have the words. I think wherever we find ourselves, young or old, et cetera, I mean, the Book of Common Prayer has a prayer, a packet of prayer for us. And then I would also call you back to the Book of Common Prayer and the Catechism. The Catechism offers 7 genres of prayer. 7 genres of prayer. And so just as a little bit of a spiritual deepening and exercise, I would ask you to go to the Book of Common Prayer and the Catechism, find that where it says, what is prayer? Not now, but later. What is prayer? Circle the one. Yes, you can write in it. It's okay. It's not a venal sin. You can write in it. And find the prayer genre that you default to, right? Thanksgiving, intercession, petition, etc. Find the one you know the absolute least about. Underline that and pray that genre of prayer for 40 days. I double dog dare you. Right. The other thing too is you made a wonderful comment about worship, Marilyn. I think, and this is the hardest piece, right? So if we want growth, right? If you want growth, here's the question back to us. What are you willing to lose to get it? Hello, somebody. What are you willing to lose to welcome? What are you willing to lose? Now I'm talking big boy, big girl stuff now, okay? So I was a rector. I had a real job once. I was a rector of a congregation. And I had a man who was the grandson of the founder of the congregation. We were making our moves and changing the liturgy, et cetera. It was tense for a while, as you can imagine. Cradle Episcopalians, sometimes we cradle Episcopalians we can be more than a notion sometimes. Not you, of course, other ones, not you. Anyway, finally, this gentleman realized what was at stake, and he came up to me, and I love him for this. He said this. He said, Father Wright, he said, I have realized that I don't need to have everything to be about me. In other words, he was saying is that it's just fine that we can have some worship that doesn't have to be my stuff. As long as it meets the mission, the why, the need, the purpose. And when he did that, and he began to say that publicly to other people, his peers, that's the only time that the needle actually moved. I was preaching my face off and it was going nowhere. But until John said, we need to make some space for some other people and what they might want. So at St. David's, is there a worship service that really is keyed to people who have no earthly idea what the Episcopal Church is? And it may take some of us out of our comfort zones. But so the ask is, where are my business people at? The ask is, can you suffer some inconvenience for a while that it might bring somebody to the church? Can you suffer for a little while? The book we read is full of suffering, by the way. That big piece of wood on the wall, that's a guy, that guy. That's the symbol of the organization, by the way. Right? Can we suffer a little bit? But for the redeeming, right, cause of, there's somebody out there that might find a home if we do things a little bit different. All right, enough of that. Other thoughts, questions, concerns, critiques, criticisms?
Yes, there's a question. There's a question from Bill on that very theme. How do you reach out and bring people to Jesus when we are on islands because of COVID?
Great question. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that you just got to run some experiments. Has been as best I can tell you, Carlton. You got to run some experiments. I think one of the things that we've tried to do, Sally showed you some data. We moved from declining in many categories to holding, right? So flat is the new up, right? At least it's on the way somewhere. And part of that was changing the expectation and tone. Part of that is changing the expectation and tone. And so I think that has to do with maybe some organization within St. David's beginning to move on that. What is the purpose of St. David's? St. David's is here to invite people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then chopping that up into ways that, and some people bring a lot of imagination to that. Some people have business cards that they pass to people. Some people run a full-on campaign. The Diocese of Atlanta, for instance, we started a podcast. We started something called Imagine Church. All that is just sort of trying to spitball and run some experiments, running the risk of failing marvelously, being the butt of a joke. I'm putting myself in a position to be the butt of jokes because I think we're going to have to iterate ourselves out of where we are. Here's what some people are doing, Carlton. Some people are thinking if they just hunker down and hunker, until we get the all clear from Dr. Fauci, then we'll just go back to the way we've always been. I got a news flash for you, friend. Ain't gonna happen. The data said before we went into COVID that the Episcopal Church had declined by 24% over the last decade. So what in the hell, if you'll allow me to say that, what in the hell are we racing back to? No, now's the time to put your foot on the gas. Throw some imagination to this thing. One of the most imaginative pieces you can do is, who is St. David's neighbor? If I drew a 1, 3, 5 mile circle around St. David, who is he, who is she, and what does she need? This is not me sitting in a room with other St. David's parishioners approximating what they might need. This is me doing a listen, write this down, data-driven, faith-inspired experiment. I said data-driven. Where are my math people at? Data-driven. Who are these people? What's their income? What's their need? What's their average age? every church is not going to overflow with 16-year-olds, right? There may be some middle of life ministry that needs to happen in Roswell, Georgia. There may be some end of life ministry that happens. It needs to happen in Roswell, Georgia. We damn sure know that there's some Hispanic ministry that happens in Roswell, Georgia. All that we know that the labor force is right there. We know who the labor force is. We know that if we take a left or a right off of some of our fancy highways and byways in Roswell, we'll end up in a place where we know people don't have the same kind of resources that you and I have, right? So I would say, Carlton, that's just me talking. What's way more interesting is that what experiments does the Roswell data say we have to run? That's way more exciting than whatever I'm talking about. At St. Paul's, when I was the rector of St. Paul's, good Lord, almost 10 years ago, what I decided is that I wanted every middle class African American. This is where I started. Every African American middle class person to come to St. Paul's. Because what I saw was a market niche. I saw that there were lots of Black and brown, Afro-Caribbean, African-American people who were the only African-American in their job or where their social circumstance all week long, and they needed a place to worship in their own idiom with their own music, where they could let their hair down and be. That was phase one. I'm a city boy. I don't know nothing about fishing, but I do know that real good fishermen, I've read somewhere, that good fishermen go out looking for a particular kind of fish. So who's your fish in Roswell? I was getting African-American families from Westminster and Pi Day and all this sort of stuff. I was after young families because, number one, in a young marriage, 2 careers, and young kids, they need Jesus. Can the church say amen?
Preach. Preach.
If you got a young marriage, by young, sub 10 years, if you got a young marriage, you're working on 2 careers and you got some babies in the house, you are under pressure and you need Jesus. So that was our phase one. Phase two also went to the Caribbean folks. We realized that we had a great, wonderful opportunity to grow by Caribbean folks. The third wave was to make it interracial. Right. So what fish are you looking for? Now everybody's welcome. Don't get me wrong. Don't think that I'm being too narrow here. Everybody's welcome all the time and twice on Sunday. But in terms of intentionality, this is where we put our marbles. And then we had to iterate. So the vestry's got to be cooking up some plans here. Spiritual leadership in the vestry, not just fiduciary, spiritual leadership. Yeah. That's a great question, Carlton. So the data-driven experiments are where it really is. And I got to tell you, you guys are looking for a rector. Knowing the little bit I know now, if I was a rector looking for a gig and I already met some people who were already having the deep water conversations, I would be excited. Because what that would mean for me is that I was joining a team. They weren't looking to me to do all the work. Hello, somebody. That means that I'm joining the team. I love to join the team, right? I love to join the team. That'd be great. That'd be really cool to think that we're going to do this together, that is our purpose. We're going to do this together. That would be exciting to me. Yeah, and some of that was already cooking. Not all of it, but some of it was cooking. Yeah. Others?
Well, I don't think we have more time for questions, Bishop, but that was wonderful. And I'll take credit for asking the question, but it really was Bill's thoughts. It was his question, but I'm the mouthpiece, so I guess. But anyway, that was a very good, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well,
one thing to that.
Sure, Sally.
I just want to say that we have tools that can help you do demographics. So if you're looking at what is around you and what needs are in your community, we can help you with that.
I want to say one word last, Carlton. You got to be careful inviting preachers to talk, man. Don't you know better than that? I want to invite you / challenge you / love you into your future. And if any of this is worth anything, then it becomes a prayer for you. So if this, I mean, if you could stop a minute and think about not only what we're missing out of right now because of COVID, the fellowship that we enjoy one to the other, but if you could think out about right now that there are people out there who don't have a spiritual home, just meditate on them for a minute. There are people here who don't have anything. They're getting more brittle by the day watching the television and the breaking news. I mean, the data is clear. The depression, despair, it's on the rise, right? So what is our response as Jesus people, right? So my invitation, and this is the last thing I'll say, is one of the ways we begin to incarnate in our Anglican tradition this stuff is that we pray so that we can become the words we pray. So I wonder if now wouldn't be the time to author a parish prayer. So it's not just, Lord, send us the next rector. And Lord, thank you for Dean, and thank you for Michelle, and thank you for Carol. It's not just that. It is also, God, use us in this neighborhood as a home for people who want to know you and who are carrying burdens. So that's my thing, you know, is that maybe we ask the Holy Spirit's support in trying to be this thing that Jesus has called us to be, which is fisher of people. So I don't know what form that takes on, but I think that's, you know, and then I know St. David's has got some prayer warriors. And so who are those people who got the gift of prayer, man? Sun up, noonday, sundown, who are just going to bother God until God gives you what you need. You know, parish prayers where you can come as a unified group and pray is a great unifying tool. And it helps people understand why we exist. So I thank you so very much, Carlton. I think that's more than enough. And I'll be watching and waiting. And if Sally and I, John Thompson Corte, Alicia Schuster-Weltner, Bonnie Burgess, my staff, can be of more assistance, please call on us. We are happy to support you in this. This is the right stuff to be talking about. So thank you.
Well, on that note, we're not done because we want to put you all in small groups so you can have more discussion time. We have facilitators assigned to each group, and they have discussion questions that have been thought out. And so we continue to wrestle with this topic. And Bishop, will you be able to stay on for a little bit longer, or should we say our thank yous now?
I think I'll say goodbye, because all I'm going to do is just mess up everything I've already said. So I think it's important for the people of God to talk now. So I'll take my leave.
Bishop, I did have something to run by you while they're in the group. So stand by, give us 5 minutes.
Got it.
All right, so you will all be invited to a breakout room, and it will pop up with a little invite, and so you can just join that room. If you have any trouble, I will help you. Don't worry. Here we go.
Hey, Michelle, did you put me in there with the bishop, or staying out?
I think you had an option.
I'm right here.
I'll go in a second.